I was told to leave the house after an argument. When I returned, my wife had moved out and taken our baby without telling me. I am a 33-year-old man, and the afternoon I was told to take a walk and cool off. I obeyed, because I'd been trained by peace to step back when voices rose. I walked for 45 minutes. When I returned, the apartment door opened to air, dresser drawers yanked, the changing table bare, a darker rectangle where the stroller had leaned against the wall, the echo of a home unbuttoned to fast. Our son's mobile, felt moons and stitched stars, hung motionless above an empty crib. The argument itself was small on paper and large in the room. Sleep and bills make fuses wet. They sputter, then pop. She, Hannah, said I was hovering during the bedtime routine. I said I was helping, but my voice climbed a rung it didn't need. She closed her eyes the way she does when she's deciding which fight to feed and told me to go for a walk. I can't think with you breathing like that, she said. Just go. So I went, because I remembered a dozen other nights where leaving for an hour saved us a week. We had been new parents for 6 months. Our son, Jude, had a laugh that started as a hiccup and turned into a sparkler. He liked the edge of a book better than any toy. At 3 a.m., he smelled like milk and patience. I was a man teaching himself to sleep in chapters. Hannah said often that I was learning, a word that made me feel grated. I took the long route down to the river, past the closed cafe, where we used to meet on Fridays, when we were just two people auditioning a future. My pocket buzzed twice, then went quiet. I didn't check. It felt like good behavior not to. I stopped on the footbridge and breathed into my scarf, and told myself I'd apologize when I got back for whatever I'd done wrong this time, which is what marriage had begun to sound like in my head, a question with my name in it. The silence in the apartment when I opened the door was not the quiet of a baby sleeping. It was the quiet of a page torn out. The diaper caddy, gone. The basket of washed onesies, gone. The framed photo from the hospital, an imprint on the wall where the sun had faded around it. On the dining table, an envelope with my name printed in Hannah's careful, kindergarten teacher handwriting. Inside, one page. We need space. Don't come looking for us until you've thought about the way you make me feel. I'm not safe when you're like this. Like this was undefined. Safe was a word that landed on my chest and didn't move. I ran through the apartment as if she might be hiding in a closet out of kindness. I opened the bathroom cabinet, her toothbrush gone, my razor left, her moisturizer missing like a person had been carefully erased. In the bedroom, her clothes were absent except for 2 sweaters she hated. The laundry bin held only my socks. The nursery had been emptied with the unsentimental efficiency of someone ripping tape off a wound. I called straight to voicemail. I texted, "Where are you?" and then immediately, "Are you okay?" as if those questions were the same shape. 3 gray dots appeared, then disappeared, then nothing. The clock over the stove ticked like a metronome set to slow for my blood. I checked our shared location app we hadn't opened since we were engaged and worried about missed trains. Her dot, deactivated. The bank app, one transfer the day before, a sum that made my stomach burn, to a checking account I didn't recognize. Our joint savings, not emptied, but lighter, as if someone had tested the weight of it. I opened the file with our lease. Only my name on it. She'd insisted, in case the school district moves us later. In case. Later. The words felt expensive now. I called her sister. Voicemail. I called her mother, who answered with a voice infused with knowledge. She said she wasn't authorized to say where Hannah had gone. She said Hannah needed safety and calm. She said she hoped I'd reflect. Every sentence had been threaded onto a string before I dialed. I asked if Jude was okay. She said, "He's fine." The way people say it when they want you to stop asking questions that widen rooms. I wasn't calm. I wasn't dangerous, either. I was a man about to sleep in a bed that smelled like the absence of his family. Hannah and I have been married for years. The first year was a movie, scrambled eggs at midnight, trains to nowhere for coffee, plans like paper airplanes that actually flew. The second year we put our furniture in rooms we could afford, and congratulated ourselves on being practical. In year 3, fertility grabbed the narrative like a director no one hired. Hannah learned acronyms and spoke in cycles. I scheduled my body around hers. There were syringes in a bathroom glass, and plastic cups with lids and a calendar on the fridge with stars that felt like weather reports we couldn't control. When Jude arrived after a labor that was a corridor with no windows, I cried the way a person cries at a miracle they thought was a rumor. Hannah held him like an apology for the months she had spoken to no one but fate. We were a trio with a map that had a single city, home. Then the city got noisy. The truth in here is not cinematic. Hannah was tired. I was tired. Our tired made a third person in the room who hated both of us. We had small arguments about the red light on the baby monitor, big arguments about money, Repeated arguments about whose turn it was to be the voice at 3 a.m. Hannah's language started using absolutes. Always, never, again. She said I hovered. She said I made her feel watched. I learned to count to 10 and then to 100. I learned to put dishes away without sound. I learned to breathe quieter. 3 weeks before the walk, we had a fight about Jude's pediatrician. Hannah didn't like the way the doctor asked her questions without looking up. I defended a man whose waiting room toys were always disinfected. She said I was on the doctor's side, like always. I said there were not sides. She said I was gaslighting, a word we had borrowed from podcasts but rarely agreed upon. The fight ended with my apology because apologizing cost me less than being right. I took pictures of the rooms that night, the absence as proof. It felt obscene to document emptiness, but I'd learned there are days when you're asked to prove you aren't a fire. I put the letter on the counter and stared at it, until the words dissolved into black threads. At 2 a.m. the door knocked hard enough for me to taste metal. Police. A wellness check, they said. A report had been made. Did I have weapons in the home? I said no. They looked anyway, their eyes courteous but skeptical, a choreography of state. I showed them Jude's empty crib. I showed them the letter. One of them, older, asked if I had somewhere to stay tonight. I said this was my lease. He nodded as if leases are talismans that sometimes fail. After they left, I slept in fits, each minute a stitch ripped out by a sound, a neighbor's shower, a truck's reverse beeper, my own breath learning new shapes. In the morning I texted my boss, and wrote the phrase, family emergency, which is code for, I am a man folding. By noon, texts began arriving from numbers that weren't in my phone. Give her space. Don't make this worse. Be the bigger person. None asked where Jude's sleep sack was, if he'd taken his medication for reflux, which giraffe toy stopped him crying at mile 8 of despair. This is how it feels when people decide your role without studying the script. I called the pediatrician's office to flag that Jude might come in with someone else. The receptionist said the chart had already been updated. New contact number, temporary address withheld. The phrase withheld tugged at something in me that had stayed rational. I thanked her and hung up, and steadied myself against the counter until the room's edges softened. In the afternoon, I walked through every hour with Hannah in my head. The months felt different in retrospect, like a trail of breadcrumbs I hadn't noticed being eaten by birds. She had joined a mom's group at the library, and started staying after, for fellowship. She had asked me to sign a paper at the bank, to make deposits easier, and I had signed because we were busy. She had mentioned a distant cousin with a spare room, if we ever needed a break. She had been collecting words like safety and space the way people collect coupons. When I finally reached her on the 3rd day, it was a video call that didn't connect and then did on the 4th try. The camera showed a neutral wall, and a drape I didn't recognize. Jude made a noise off-screen that made my skin hurt and my heart lift. Hannah's face was arranged into calm. She said she hoped I was using this time wisely. She said I frightened her when I was like that. I asked what like that was, and she said intense. She said controlling. She said the therapist in her mom group had a slot for me if I wanted it. I asked where they were. She said she wasn't comfortable sharing. I told her Jude's medication dosage and the brand of moisturizer that didn't make his cheeks rash. She said she had it under control. She ended the call. I sat on the rug and held the baby blanket to my face, and remembered that smell is the most dangerous memory. There is a line between being careful and being erased. That afternoon, I called a lawyer, whose name I pulled from a Jenga tower of panic and advice. She spoke like a metronome and asked me to tell the story without adjectives. I did my best. She said words like temporary orders, and status quo, and parental abduction is rare, but not impossible. She said to document everything, the letter, the emptiness, the wellness check, the call log, the bank transfer. She said to keep my voice low in every message, to not give anyone an exciting sentence to misquote. That night, I found my copy of our marriage certificate and our son's birth certificate, and put them in a folder labeled proof. The next morning, I drove the loop of playgrounds we'd taken Jude to and felt like a man in a movie who doesn't know how to be in a movie. At a park across town, I saw a stroller almost like ours, and followed it with my eyes as if gazing were a kind of prayer. It wasn't. On day 5, Hannah sent a list of conditions that read like a peace treaty drafted by someone who thinks love is a settlement. I needed to apologize for my tone. I needed to acknowledge harm publicly to her family. I needed to agree in writing to change thought patterns. Then, maybe, she would consider supervised time. Our son was a verb now. Consider. I sent back to sentences my lawyer had blessed. I said I was ready to meet to discuss Jude's schedule in a neutral place. I said our son needed both his parents. The dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Then, you can see him when I feel safe. The mobile above the crib spun when the heat came on, quietly, a galaxy hanging over air. I lay on the floor and listened to it whisper the rules. Sometimes the person who says safe is the one who locked the door. Before I fell asleep on night 6, I put the pacifier that had fallen behind the dresser into a zip bag like evidence. It felt absurd. It felt correct. Somewhere, Jude's cry rose, and somewhere, Hannah closed a door. The first time I saw Jude again, it was in a church basement under fluorescent lights that made everyone's kindness look tired. Folding chairs, a table with store-brand cookies, a sign taped to the wall, Mom and me, Thursdays at 10. It was Monday. Hannah had agreed to a 1-hour meeting because it felt neutral. She arrived with Jude pressed to her chest in a sling I didn't recognize, the fabric a pattern of small anchors. He turned his head at the sound of my voice the way babies do when their body remembers before their face does. My knees went warm. I didn't touch him at first. I sat with my hands on my thighs and said the sentences you say when the world has shrunk to a person's weight. How's he sleeping? Is the reflux better? Did the cream help? Hannah answered in clipped, competent phrases, her jaw tight. She looked like someone who had spent a week practicing calm in the mirror. When I asked where they were staying, she said, "You don't need that information to love him." I told her I had filed for temporary orders. Her eyes flickered. She said she knew. A process server had knocked at her cousin's place. Cousin. There it was, a door with her last name on it. The hour ended with a rule sheet Hannah had typed. No pictures of Jude on social media. No visitors during your time. No feeding him foods we haven't discussed. Some were reasonable. Some were a leash. I agreed to the reasonable and ignored the leash. We set the next meeting, Wednesday, same place. I walked out shaking and steadied myself on the stone railing while mothers filed in for a breastfeeding class and didn't look at me, because looking would mean inheriting a piece of my story. My lawyer moved faster than my fear. She filed for an emergency hearing. She used words like withholding and status quo and reminded the court in proper, bloodless paragraphs that I had bathed Jude and folded Jude and sung Jude to sleep 6 nights out of 10. She attached photos of our apartment, before and after, without commentary. She attached the letter where I was called unsafe without specifics. When the date arrived, I wore the least wrinkled shirt I owned and sat on a bench with men who were learning to occupy less space for the sake of the room. Hannah had counsel. I had expected that and still felt it as a small stab. Her affidavit described me as controlling, prone to intensity, over-involved with bonding. It made love sound like surveillance. She listed examples with the flat certainty of someone building a case. I had insisted on certain nap times. I had questioned her about a dose. I had corrected her latch. I had hovered during a bath. In any other light, those were Tuesday evening. Under courthouse bulbs, they were a dossier. The judge looked like a man whose hobby is precision. He asked narrow questions. He frowned at adjectives. He asked why the child's primary home had been changed without agreement. He asked who held the lease. He asked whether there was any police report besides a wellness check. Hannah's lawyer said Hannah had acted out of an abundance of caution. Mine said Jude's father was not a hazard. He was a habit. The judge ordered a temporary schedule, alternating overnights, exchanges in public, a requirement that neither party relocate outside the county without consent. It wasn't victory. It was oxygen. The first overnight felt like borrowing someone else's child. Jude looked around the apartment as if the furniture had moved while he slept. He batted the mobile and made the hiccup laugh, and then cried because the air smelled different. I changed him on a towel because the table was gone. I warmed a bottle with a pot, and careful timing because the warmer was gone. I walked the hallway singing the only lullaby my dad ever sang to me, off-key, with extra hummed parts, because my body needed something older than court orders to stand on. He slept, then didn't. At 3:12 a.m., with his cheek against my sternum, I cried for the first time since the walk, not the pretty kind, the kind where your mouth is open, and no sound comes out and you're glad no one is grading you. Co-parenting became a series of diplomatic courtesies performed by people who had been in love. We texted in bullet points. He has diaper rash. Bring the green blanket. He likes the whale song now. Every time I typed Hannah's name, my thumbs remembered wanting to text her photos of Jude's fist discovering his foot. I didn't. The oaths we were now under required restraint, so did whatever survived of my dignity. The mothers group took sides without declaring them. One woman handed me a list of parks, with swings that didn't stick. Another avoided my eyes at the grocery store. Hannah's cousin, it turned out, had friends who liked to screenshot. A narrative formed in certain circles featuring me as the man who made a woman flee for her safety. It didn't matter that what I had made, mostly, were dinners and a damp laundry pile. and soothing sounds at 4 a.m. narratives don't like laundry, they like arcs. In the middle of this, my own mother called and asked, gently, if I had done anything. The word anything is a god with infinite arms. I said no and then elaborated because a single syllable cannot hold a living room. I described the arguments, the latch notes I shouldn't have given, the panic I felt when Jude coughed too long. My mother listened the way women listen when they've loved a man, who tries too hard to be gentle, and sometimes comes off sharp. She said, "You were scared," and I sat down on the kitchen floor like I had been granted permission to be a mammal. There were worse moments. One exchange ended in the church lot with Hannah refusing to unclip Jude's car seat for a full minute while listing, in a level voice, things you need to fix. Another time, Jude's sweater came home smelling like a detergent that made his skin pucker, and I medged about it, too direct, and her reply used the word control twice. I learned to send messages my lawyer wouldn't wince at. I learned to narrate to myself, you are not being erased. You are making a record. Proof became my second faith. The folder on my desk fattened with printouts, schedules, receipts, notes from daycare, a screenshot of me on the floor with Jude laughing because the spatula was hilarious. Hannah once texted that Jude had slept 10 hours straight with me, never with you, and I scrolled back to an older photo of him slumped on my chest at dawn and did not send it, because the point wasn't to win a comment, it was to outlast a year. At the second hearing, the judge looked bored by our adjectives and kinder to our calendars. He told us to stop using Jude as a scoreboard. He asked if we had considered mediation. Hannah's lawyer said Hannah had concerns about communication. Mine suggested a parenting coordinator. The judge smiled in the way people do when someone finally says a food they recognize at a restaurant with too many options. He ordered it. We paid a stranger to sit between us on Zoom and teach us to hand a baby across state lines like a peace plant. The coordinator was a woman who had seen men and women both try to make themselves bigger with fear. She called us out when we used words like always and never. She asked us to describe Jude, not each other. She asked us to agree to small doable things. One place to store medical information, one shared dock for sleep, one reminder each week that we didn't grow Jude by ourselves. She did not fix us. She did arrange the furniture enough that we stopped stubbing our toes. Some nights remained clean pain. When Jude toddled toward the door saying a version of, "Mama," on my night, I felt my rib cage creak. When he woke at my house and reached for a sound only Hannah makes, I put my cheek to his hair and hummed until his body made a truce. On the nights Hannah had him, I ran along the river in the rain because I needed weather that matched me. Friends tried to translate. One said Hannah's language, safe, probably had other sentences behind it I didn't want and might not deserve to hear. Another said I was being too generous, that I should fight dirty. A third sent me a link to an article about custody abduction, and I closed it because my heart started doing rabbit math. In therapy, I learned to sit still on a chair and say truths like a man reading a grocery list. I am not a monster. I am also not perfect. I miss my son when he is gone like missing is a job. I do not trust my wife. I want my son to know both our faces without choosing. Hannah and I had a meeting with the pediatrician, a woman who looked us both in the eye. We sat on opposite corners of the room like students who had broken group rules. The doctor laughed at Jude's fascination with her stethoscope and then addressed us both evenly. He will be okay if you are okay, she said. He will be okay if you're not. But it's harder. We nodded as if we'd decided something. The truth under everything was a quiet betrayal, not the leaving, which was loud, but the weeks before, when someone built a raft out of words like safety and later, and didn't tell me we were near water. I wanted to rage at that architecture. I also wanted to sleep. Those wants competed until they both lay down. The last confrontation that mattered happened on a Wednesday in a parking garage. I'd arrived 2 minutes late to an exchange because I'd been stuck behind a delivery truck. Hannah started listing consequences in a tone like a math teacher. Lateness meant instability meant harm. I said I was sorry. I did not explain trucks. She said she would consider reducing my time if patterns persisted. Something in me lowered its temperature. I said, evenly, that I would document any withheld time and file accordingly. I said, evenly, that Jude's relationship with me was not a privilege I earned by pleasing her. I said, evenly, that I would not let anger set the schedule. The sentence that changed the air was the simplest. We can be decent, or we can be in court. She looked at me, for once, like someone who had expected a different man to show up, and had to greet this one instead. Months folded. Jude changed sizes 3 times. He discovered blueberries. He developed a preference for a particular board book, whose pages now ripple from drool and bath steam. He learned to clap. He clapped at the dog that lives on the 3rd floor, and at the bus and at the lamp. He clapped at Hannah once when she walked into the room, and I looked away because a man, who loves his son wants his son to clap for everyone safely. Hannah and I are not friends. We are civil most days. She has stopped using safe as a sword and started using schedule as a shield. She sees a therapist who makes her write down second thoughts before they become actions. She still tells people I am intense. I am also gentler on purpose. When Jude cries at pickup, I do not look at her for approval. I look at him and let him be a baby. If you want a clean resolution, I cannot give you one. The court finalized a plan that looks like a pamphlet. Mondays and Tuesdays with me, Wednesdays and Thursdays with her, alternating weekends, holidays divided by an algorithm that feels like a factory respecting a feast. We write summaries in a shared document: rash, better, nap, short, new word, ball. Sometimes we add a photo because kindness is a habit you have to practice even when it gets you nothing obvious back. I learned some things I didn't want. That people will believe the first story they hear if it comes with a word like safety. That you can love someone and be the wrong person to hold their fear. That being right is less useful than being boring in front of a judge. That screenshots are not love, but can protect it. That the first full night your child sleeps at your house after a long drought is a kind of sacrament no church can invent. I was told to leave the house after an argument. When I returned, my wife had moved out and taken our baby without telling me. That sentence is still true. Also true. Last night Jude leaned against me on the couch and fell asleep with one hand inside my sleeve like he was keeping me from leaving. I sat there until my left arm ached, and then I sat longer because leaving is where the story hurt, and staying is how I want him to learn to read his world. When he's older, if he asks what happened, I will tell him the version that doesn't make him a prize or a proof. I will say, your mother and I broke in places we didn't fix fast enough. I will say, you were never a bargaining chip. I will say, I fought for time because time is love with a watch on. I will say, if you ever feel like leaving, do not take a person without telling them, even if a word like safe wants to hand you a script. I will say, come find me. I'll be the man with a folder of boring documents and a mobile of felt moons that still turns when the heat kicks on, waiting to show you that ordinary courage looks like being there, again and again, even when the room is not fair. Follow me for more stories.